excited today about our two speakers, Gina Green-Harris and Susan Passmore. They are both experts in their field of research participant, especially those who have historically been underrepresented. So Gina is the inaugural director of the Center for Community Engagement and Health Partnerships, regional office in Milwaukee. Among other responsibilities, she oversees community advisory boards and co-leads the Just Research training program. Through CCE, Gina Harris also serves as the director of the Wisconsin Alzheimer's Institute, and as a champion of health equity, she helped guide CCE to further advance research in the African American community in a culturally inclusive manner. Can people hear me okay?
Okay.
Green-Harris has participated in many research programs, received many awards, and has been appointed to numerous university and community committees. Most notably, she currently serves as chair of the State of Wisconsin Governor's Health Equity Council and the NIH Community Engagement, Recruitment, and Retention of Underrepresented Groups Steering Committee. She received her MBA from Franklin University in Columbus, Ohio, and her bachelor's at Central State University in Wilberforce, Ohio. She's currently pursuing her doctoral degree, as if she doesn't have enough to do, in clinical investigation from the University of Wisconsin-Madison. So welcome, Gina. We're delighted to have you here. Our second speaker is Susan Passmore. Many of you may also know Susan. She's a PhD and assistant professor in the School of Nursing, who serves as the co-director of the Just Research program. She brings to her role significant experience in community engaged research, health equity, and the promotion of research equity. Dr. Passmore leads the UW Building Trust Initiative, which is a research support component of UW-ICTR, designed to build the capacity of both researchers and members of underrepresented communities to work together. As a cultural anthropologist and mixed methods researcher, Dr. Passmore's scholarly work focuses upon the social construction of trust and the practical application of this knowledge to create innovative approaches for building researcher trustworthiness. This is the foundation of an R21 from National Human Genome Research Institute, feasibility of an innovative method to understand the dynamics of choice and create diversity in genomics research among older African Americans, as well as a supplement award from the National Institute on Aging, maximizing components of trustworthiness in the decision to participate in preclinical Alzheimer's disease research involving lumbar puncture. Dr. Passmore's work also includes study of innovative approaches to community engagement. Her work with Dr. Stephen B. Thomas in Black barbershops and salons is the subject of a chapter in Meredith Minkler's 4th edition of Community Organization and Community Building for Health and Welfare. Our community engagement work, other community engagement work includes service-based approaches and the use of human-centered design to support adoption of health interventions. Dr. Passmore received the 2022 ACTS Award for contributing to the diversity and inclusiveness of the translational workforce. How lucky are we to have such two wonderful speakers with us today? Without further ado, I know you're all anxious to hear from them, so I will turn it over to Gina and Susan. Thank you both.
Okay, thank you. Thank you. That's really wonderful introductions. I'm impressed with us, Gina.
I'm a little scared of us, Sue, but welcome everyone. Thank you so much for joining us this afternoon. Sue, you're going to go ahead and get us started, right? Going to kick us off?
I'm going to share my screen. Am I successfully doing that?
You are, yes.
Okay, great. Okay, so we're going to talk to you a little bit about just a small little snippet of our work and what we've been thinking about in terms of the inclusion of diverse populations and research, especially clinical trials. So I'm going to start off. I'm not advancing. Weird. I'm not advancing for some reason. There it goes. Did I advance for you all?
Yes, there you go. It's working now. Mm-hmm.
Okay, so I don't know how many of you are intimately familiar with this document, but this is This is the National Institute of Health Revitalization Act of 1993. And this is the first policy from NIH that said we need to work on our diversity in research participation. At that time, they were thinking about women and minorities. And why is pretty clear, I think. We know that it's important for our science, that we don't do good science when our samples are limited. And in terms of the ethics of our work, right, the principle of justice is that we need to make sure that the benefits of our research is reaching populations equitably, which again requires research participation. And obviously we're working towards health equity, then those same populations that are underrepresented in research are also those same populations that are experiencing the most dramatic health disparities. So working towards health equity requires us to work with have diverse participation in our studies. But the really significant thing about this particular document is that it's 30 years old. What we have now, after 30 years of work and knowledge and thinking about this document and this policy, is really not a lot of movement forward. We still have a dramatic lack of diversity in clinical trials, despite 30 years. And so there's some problems there that we think, really requires maybe a rethinking of our approach that we've taken over these 40 years. I'm going to give you one example of what this looks like in genomics research, but I could just as easily do cancer research or really any research, any health topic, any condition across the spectrum, including those that impact populations experiencing health disparities more substantially than others. So across the research enterprise. And again, this is just an example from the genomics research, right? So we see that in genomics-wide association studies is a dramatic overrepresentation of folks from Europe, of European descent. And what that means is that we don't necessarily have the best information on the human genome. It's not complete. There's a serious lack of our knowledge. But it also means that innovations like precision medicine that holds such promise for the future right now has a better chance of helping those populations that are not experiencing health disparities. So, so are we moving towards health equity? Not necessarily so directly, right? So what's causing this lack of diversity? I can't see the chat or anything. So somebody, Gina, you'll have to respond to the chat if someone puts something in there. Oh, there we go. I don't know if anybody wants to answer this question. What's causing the lack of diversity in research? What's the first thing that comes to your mind? You can put it in the chat or just get off mute and say something. Institutionalized racism. I can't see the chat.
Distrust, lack of trust, accessibility, distrust of scientists, of course, institutionalized racism. You read that one. Time commitment needed for participation, general population of our area, lack of a location of recruitment, scientists not willing to put in the work, and study eligibility limitations and limits enrollment, time for scientists to get out into the community and meet people, lack of community engagement, and then mirroring disparities and injustice that pervades all aspects of society, and lack of cultural competence within research personnel. You guys don't need this. No, I'm just kidding.
That's
we're
exactly
done.
what
We're done.
what I
No,
was
I'm just
thinking.
kidding. Those are great answers. Oh, health literacy. Yes. Excellent.
Yeah, yeah, those are awesome answers. All those things, and more, but it seems like you all have been thinking about this problem, and I think that you've hit many of the things that we're thinking about too. Lack of funding. Yeah, so really good point there, because what we're dealing with this is how things have always been done, and the structure and within the infrastructure within where we do our work. So everything has been set up kind of to result where we are. And we believe, anyways, that in order to move forward, we really need to rethink pretty much everything. And there are structural things that funding and grants, absolutely. And it's not an easy thing. It's really going to require a rethinking of how we do just about everything at every level. So not too hard. If you look at the literature, if you went and went to Google Scholar, you'll see that, and you put in lack of diversity and research participation, you would see a lot of articles in trust and mistrust and distrust. And that's really where, and some of you mentioned that too, that's really where a lot of the work has been over these last 30 years. So what we're going to actually do is kind of put a pin in that distrust problem, and we're going to come back to it, absolutely. But for now, let's just kind of put a pin in it and think about other things. And the first thing I want to bring to your attention is something you've already mentioned, and that is bias on where we are doing our work and who is doing the work. So we've done a small mixed method study here at UW back in 2020. We had a survey and some interviews, mostly with folks from SNPH. They were investigators and research staff, mostly clinical researchers. And they were mostly white, which actually represents the breakout of faculty, staff, demographics at UW. So that gives you a little bit sense of the sample of the study. But the most important finding, and I think some of you might have already heard us talk about this, was that when we asked folks about how important is it that people of diverse racial and ethnic backgrounds participate in research, about 90% of folks said it was extremely or very important. However, when we asked folks, how important is it for your own specific research, so not in the general, not in the abstract, that number dropped down to less than 40. So less than half, and a big difference between that theoretical, abstract knowledge that this is an important issue and actually working on strategies to get it done. We also asked about knowledge of best practices around community engagement. And another thing, if you looked into that Google Scholar search you just did, you'd also see a lot of work around community topics on community engagement, because what we know right now is that best practices in order to do this work is community engagement. So working with a CAB, working with community-based partners, and other kinds of strategies like that. We asked folks if they knew about those kinds of strategies. And we, again, same kind of pattern as we had in the slide before this. We had a high level of knowledge of best practices. So people know that maybe having a community advisory board would help increase the diversity of their studies. But again, same pattern. Implementation of best practices is much lower. So knowledge, again, is not driving implementation of these best practices. And what's really interesting, I think, on this slide is that we look at the years in research, those folks who have less years in research, so presumably closer to their training, were more knowledgeable about best practices for inclusive engagement. And that's probably not surprising, but they were no more likely to be implementing those strategies. So there's obviously a problem on our side, and it's not about not knowing that the problem exists or not knowing what we need to do or having some ideas about what we need to do. So in our interviews, we had 3 major themes that came out that help us to understand what might be driving some of these things. So, for example, I would say PIs generally just don't bring it up. The perception is that there's not much we can do about it, like the population we get, it's the population we get. And this idea that there's nothing that can be done, it was the most pervasive in these interviews. They came up almost in every single interview. And that's why the article there that we have that talks about this data is actually called "There's Not Much We Can Do," because that is very strong. And so that by itself is a huge barrier. If we believe that we can't do anything, then it makes no sense to put effort towards it. So that's a place to start. Another thing is that we saw there was a certain amount of bias and the way people thought about who makes a good participant. And this is actually something that's been also studied in other contexts. Like there is a study from the University of Alabama at Birmingham, I think, where they also looked at perceptions of a good participant. So who makes a good participant? Well, in this case, this research staff person said, African Americans have jobs that won't let them take off from work, going to follow-up visits. They might not have the capability of having a private car. They might have to take the bus. So these are assumptions about somebody's ability to participate in research. Well, we don't know if these are so strong as to direct people when they're thinking about giving opportunities to participate in research to people. It makes sense that if you think someone is a good participant, that you would be sure to make sure that they have that opportunity to participate. You may not be putting your effort for those folks who you don't think necessarily will stay in the study or who won't be able to come to the study visits. And then the final big theme, and these are not the only people who said these things, these are just representative of the themes in the interviews. Another big theme is this one. I still mostly feel like I don't know the right way to do this. It's an overwhelming feeling I have thinking about recruiting participants from populations that have those kinds of histories and experiences in healthcare. So there's anxiety or doubt and just apprehension before you walk into the room to recruit the patient. And so for us, especially this last one, I think really made us think about all that work on trust, distrust, and research participation, although really important. And you don't walk away and say that we don't think that Tuskegee is important in shaping people's willingness to participate. That's absolutely not true. There is certainly issues of trust in science, and trust in researchers, and trust in the medical establishment that's born of a history of discrimination and abuse. That's absolutely true. But this quote from this investigator kind of makes you feel like this discussion that we've had, amplifying this problem of distrust, has been kind of deflating, maybe to folks who really want to do something. So there's hesitancy, there's not knowing, the apprehension before you walk in the room for populations that have those kinds of histories and experiences in healthcare. So this investigator knows, and that is giving them some anxiety and doubt. And so I think we see our goal, it's like, let's get past that. How do we get past that? And so that is when I'm going to take out that pin in trust. And we're going to show a video that hopefully will run, where we went out and talked to folks on the street about what their thoughts are about participating in research and trust in researchers and science. So I'm gonna just get us started here, and then Gina will take it from here after that.
When I think of research studies, participants are doing trials, experiments, whether it's involving medication, whether it's involving physical limits, or just anything to get some end results.
Comes to mind that you're looking for something and you're trying to get answers. So example like, what's the cause of diabetes? What can we do to cure diabetes?
To research and to do things, you have to experiment, and that could be risky, but it's a risk that it has to be taken for things to know if it works or not.
I feel like there's not a lot of transparency when it comes to the research.
What are the side effects? What is they actually trying to fix?
If they can do some testing and find out something that could benefit someone as well as myself, then why wouldn't you?
As long as it's not a threat to my health, okay, to danger to me personally, that's the only thing that will stop me personally from doing a study.
If they're gonna use it for something productive, it'll help. And this is a study, take me 2 seconds. I might not care about it, but it might have been what they needed.
If you don't have research, you won't be able to know what the outcomes are, so that you can be able to move forward in whatever you're trying to accomplish. So you have to have some type of data, some type of research, some type of information out there so people will be able to know what's going on.
If it was somebody who's like from the CDC, from the government, or somebody from...
Absolutely not. Absolutely not. No. They got enough for me already. They know enough for me already. It's like Jesus and then the government. He knows everything, and then it's them right below. So no, absolutely not. If it has anything to do with the government, no. No. You tell me it's like the Blood Center of Wisconsin saving lives, take it. But if it has to do with the CDC, the FB and the I, the R, the S, anything governmental, absolutely not. I'll give an example. If UW and Madison, I have this young lady's like, yo, I really believe if I do this study, if I get your DNA and add it to this, so on and so on and so forth, we'll get this, which might save lives. I'm all for it. If it's just you doing this study. But if you're, who are you working for? Who sent you? Is the question. You know what I mean? Like, who are you really working for? And is my DNA going to be slipped on the black market for someone for any reason? Like, I have to know all of that stuff.
I would donate my blood if I was doing a blood drive, but I would not give my blood away for research, for an experiment. I think because of there was a history with an African-American woman whose blood actually did a lot for a lot of people, and she did not know that they were using her blood to be able to cure certain ailments in other individuals. So if it was something that you asked, then that'll be different. But if it was something that you took and you saw that there was a benefit, I have a problem with that.
I'm a woman of color. So when it comes to anything with the government, I'm already afraid. You know what I mean? They've used us for studies, lab rats on a regular basis, and injecting people with certain diseases just to see what kind of reaction they're going to have, and so on and so forth. And a lot of the times it comes from people of color.
And that's just due to history that we have in the United States, especially when it comes to my community. When it comes to our blood and our research, I don't think it's done in my community per se for the better of our community, especially because we know in my community we have the highest rates of almost all illnesses. You know what I mean? So it's like you take our blood and you do your research, yet we're still sickly, so the math isn't mathing. So, you know what I mean? Like, you know?
All right. Well, thanks so much, Sue, for sharing the video. Excuse me. At this time, I'm wondering, can you guys Put in the chat or unmute yourself. What are your thoughts about the video that you just watched? Any immediate responses to what you saw? And I can't read the chat, so if you're chatting, I can't see it. But we just kind of want to.
I'll monitor the chat, but so far, nothing in
Okay.
there. People go ahead and post in chat, or if you'd like to unmute.
Yeah, if you want to unmute, we're going to talk real briefly. No surprise. Talk more about that, Deanna. So I can't read the chat, so someone's going to have to read it for me. But
so Jen says, I would say their concerns are valid.
Mhm.
It highlights the need for transparency between researchers and the participants. I saw there is general knowledge of the need for research, but also general hesitancy. Positive, lots of excitement about research, but negative is trust as a barrier.
Sure.
Strong opinions and thoughts from people.
I think when we set out to do this video, we really wanted to get a true opinion of community. Oftentimes there are, as Sue has talked about, we recognize that there are barriers and there are the beliefs around the mistrust of the community. What we, again, have been learning from community is that there is some willingness to participate. Was anybody surprised at the knowledge that the community actually had? Were you struck by the willingness of the community setting parameters related to what type of research that they would do? And again, as Sue pointed out, clearly the acknowledgement of what happened through Tuskegee, Henrietta Lacks, and those type of activities that were, of course, not favorable for Black, brown communities, they definitely still showed a reasonable amount of willingness to participate. Did that surprise anyone?
There's some more comments in the chat, Gina.
Okay.
Great points, things we have to address in our outreach and consent processes, importance of sharing results and products from research with the communities that provide the data. I think that came up in one of the interviews. I loved hearing from real people. They were right on with their opinions. I get it. I think the best thing is you were out on the street meeting people where they were and talking to them. The question is about distrust in the government. How could individual investigators on government-funded studies overcome that? Dina says responses are certainly understandable due to history, lack of trust.
I want to take a second to talk about that government, and Sue, we can talk about this together. But you know what's interesting, I think, is oftentimes what happens is that community sees as our person in the video talked about, that they're not able to differentiate or understand clearly what is CDC sponsored research, what is USD government, USDA, or what is the CDC from the HRSA, HRSA, or even what is the university? How are our funded? How is our research funded through NIH? And what are those streams? One of the things that we talk about is demystifying for the community. What does it mean to be funded through government? What does it mean for research? Where most of our fundings are coming from, and how are we as investigators really responsible for those dollars, but more importantly, how are we held accountable from the IRB's perspective, from the government perspective, to be honest and earnest with our research studies. I think oftentimes it's really important for us to share with community members the layers of governmental intervention and governmental research studies. And what does that really mean? Because many times people think, oh, the FBI is studying me. Well, that may not be the case, and that's not the kind of research that we're doing. We also can talk to the community about our non-NIH funded research that we might have on our campuses. So it's really important to educate the community about what different types of research studies, and also help them understand the funding tracks for research studies, and that there is a human principal investigator. There are humans on the end of the research team, and they are all educated around what are the parameters. We have the IRB to protect the research participants, and really giving them that opportunity to open their eyes and become more educated. That's been really something we have heard from community, and when we're doing that, that's really part of of what we're doing with Just Research, bringing those actual fundamental practices where we take out that mystery about what happens behind closed doors in research. Sue, you want to add to that at all?
Well, there's just so much. I think Kristen's made a point about they seem very educated about what's happened in the past. I just kind of want to react to that. Yeah, this is us on the street. This is me and one of a member of our team doing the video. We just walking to people on the street, and we heard about Henrietta Lacks, and we heard about Tuskegee, references to those two incidents. And I would say that's pretty representative. Yes, people are very aware of what's happened in the past. So it's not, I think the answer for us as researchers is acknowledging that.
Mm-hmm.
Is acknowledging that and being aware, and certainly being aware of that.
Yeah. And I just want to say, thank you, Gina, and forgive me for pronouncing your name incorrectly at first. When we think about as Sue said before, I want to be clear about a few things, or just thinking about this. The lack of trust and the historical trauma is real, because those things are continuing to happen. And as Sue showed in the very first set of slides, we know that we have not made much advancement in the inclusion of these communities in research. So we're going to have to own some of this mistrust. But what I want us to not get stuck on is the mistrust, as Sue said earlier. We're really hoping to move past that. In fact, I've got a colleague by the name of Dr. Birdsong, who has actually worked with those attorneys from the Tuskegee study. And one of the things he said is that, and he's written an article about this, is that the men of Tuskegee understood the assignment. They understood the things that could happen, but they did not ever mean for it to be an intentional disruption for people to participate in research in the future. And so while it has stymied us to participate in the past, we can think about it from a perspective of saying, now let's kind of shift the paradigm and the conversation to own what happened, but to recognize that we are intentionally making new ideas, concepts, and activities where we know we're going to be more thoughtful, we're more protective, and we have not only policies in place, but we have intentionality as researchers to be conscientious about how we're doing our research. Those are things that we can actually use with community to help advance our work.
Yeah, I think Gina, it might be good. We have a couple more slides, and maybe we'll kind of turn to that and get moving. Okay. Nope. Okay. So I think one of the big things that coming out of the video, and I think some people have already mentioned it, is that there is not this distrust. We did not walk up to everybody and everyone said, no, I would never participate in research. We heard a lot of hesitation around government studies. We heard a lot of gray area, right? We did not hear straight no's. And I just wanted to point that out, that this is not unusual. This is another study of ours. And we asked, this is 82 African-American adults, asked them to respond to hypothetical situations involving genomics research. They're taking your DNA. And they reviewed, and they all varied on the race of the researcher, the institute that was sponsoring the research, including the government, and you already know how people feel about the government, the reason for the research, and data collection method. So some of these were pretty tough research studies to want to participate in. And nonetheless, out of 244 randomly selected hypothetical scenarios, 53 resulted in a decision of willingness to participate. Now, this is hypothetical, it's intentional and not behavior. But again, I think that this idea that there is so much distrust that there's nothing we can do is overstating it. And some examples, these quotes are from folks in this study, and you see the same things. We don't have studies that we have enough African Americans or people in color. With people recognize that there's an underrepresentation in research and it's a problem. it's important to cure diseases of people around me. I want to help others. That's something else you heard in the video. And then another sentiment besides, I mean, I could put in a lot of negative things about the government, which we also certainly saw. But this other one, I would probably be a little less hesitant if the researchers were Black or like from another group that's underrepresented in research. So the idea of diversity on the research team is very important, and that's something else we don't necessarily hear a lot about. I'm going to turn it back over to Gina now and just be quiet.
Oh, you're fine. So as we think about how do we actually do what Sue and I have been talking about, one of the critical things we believe is going from promises to practice when we're thinking about how to actually engage community, which is really important. As you all know, community engagement is becoming a huge integral part of research funding. And so we the first thing we talk about is recognizing that as an investigator or study team members, it is important to have a personal mission statement for your work. What is the why around what you're doing? Why did you start this work in the first place? What brought you to your realization that you wanted to do this type of work? And that's a really important and critical question, because it leads to your pathway of your commitment to this work in the, as the road gets rough, as they say. We recognize when you think about having equity and inclusion or diversity and doing these health equity type of research studies, they're not necessarily always well regarded, well received, but you have to understand why and what's your personal mission for doing this. We also understand that your statement of work can't be just for the funding. And so we do talk a lot about what's going on with you. We also know the next thing is to learn about and engage with the community before you make an ask. Now, we talk about this often, but we're needing to understand this from a perspective of genuineness and integrity. And Consuelo Wilkins out of Meharry talks about this at great length in her community engagement studios. We really need to understand, how are we engaging community in advance of going to community and asking them to partner with us, asking them to be CAB members. We must understand what are the needs of the communities and how have they been thriving prior to our actual conversations with them, prior to getting to know them. That's really important. And then developing this bi-directional partnership with community and stakeholders. And by community, I'm talking about lay members, I'm talking about church leaders, I'm talking about every part of that community that actually helps them to thrive. So recognizing them bi-directional partnerships means going above and beyond, not you bringing a mission or a research study to community, but maybe an idea that you have, saying to community, is this something that is practical for your community? And if not, how and what can we do together to create something that is practical? And then going back and forth with community around the ideations, around the concepts, and then putting them together for the long term of the work. And then we have to do that, trust the process of authenticity. We understand that we have to be willing to be vulnerable in communities, going into communities, recognizing that we do not, even as that investigator that Sue represented in those slides from our papers, you have to recognize that you may not be the authority in the community. While you may have the content knowledge, those people have the lived experiences, and building on the precept of what they've been doing right, what they've been doing well, and what has worked for that community, and sitting back and kind of reflecting in that and saying, not necessarily what can I bring, but what can I find that the community has used, and then utilizing that to strengthen maybe what your ideas are for that community is really important. This leads to some transparency, longevity of commitment, and real just didactic work from the community, because you want to be able to have a authentic, long-lasting, sustainable relationship with community, and then making conscious decisions to commit to sustainability. As the first question is about a personal mission, the last question is about sustainability, and where do you anticipate seeing the community after your work has concluded? What are you going to leave behind to that community? And Sue, are we at the next next slide. Yeah, we can go to the next slide. So more practices that we think about. Cultural humility is huge. We used to use cultural competency, we use cultural confidence, but the real notion is humility. And we have to think about humility in terms of being flexible, humble enough to admit our own ignorance, recognizing that the community are experts in their own right, and that we may not have the knowledge of the undergird of what's really happening in the under-revelings of the community. What has created a community where, for instance, in rural communities where they have a non-traditional transportation service, and you're saying there's no transportation. They're saying, yeah, we have a transportation system. It just doesn't look like yours. You may not know that. That's huge for community, for you to be able to discuss with them. Be willing to be uncomfortable and address complex racialized issues. Many of you have put comments in the chat already about this, recognizing that there are some moments where we're going to have to talk about this issue of the racial disparities and the health disparities as a result of constructs of racism, and being willing to have those conversations in an authentic way with community in a non-threatening way for you and for them is really critical. And that takes a step-by-step approach, by the way. It doesn't happen overnight, but it is a willingness to own what we know has happened and be willing to have those conversations. And again, thinking about a lifelong process, not a project-long process. And lifelong doesn't mean the life of the grant. It literally means how you're going to actually have a career path, a journey with this community during your own self-exploration and self-critique of how you want to engage with this community. That's really going to be critical for you as an investigator moving forward. And then I love this one about the grace of face and ambiguity. Thinking about what I say about this usually is expect that most people are coming from a perspective of goodwill, but extending courtesy and goodwill to yourself. The reality is that many of us have not experienced this relationship with community, and we go into community and it's much more difficult than we believe it would be. Take the time to give yourself grace, but also giving others grace, as there is no cookie cutter approach to this work. It definitely means that we have to modify how we've been thinking about how we do our work. We most often do a top-down approach, but we really need to think about doing a maybe bottom-up approach, or even starting in the middle where we are meeting people where they are, but we have to have that grace to do that as well. And I think there's another slide about practices, if I'm right. And then this is the final slide to think about. Next slide, Sue. We went back.
Sorry.
That's all right. Is there anything? Yep. So our last slide about this is and again, these are the practical applications that when you think about the work that Sue talked about earlier, these are the things that we definitely have to be able to do in order to meet what Sue is talking about, to overcome these hurdles that we've been thinking about for just research. And so intentional research practices, thinking about your inclusion and exclusion criteria. What does that mean? Sometimes we put things in our exclusion criteria that will definitely not be conducive to the research community in which you're trying to reach. We really need to think about, are these things necessary to be required, or are they things that we basically prefer? And why are they inclusive and exclusive? We have to do some intentional thinking about that. Recruitment site selection, for instance. Sue made a comment, or one of the comments, and sorry, not Sue didn't make this comment, but she was talking about something that the investigator said in the slides earlier. And that was about people getting to research locations. Well, if you know your recruitment site location is in a place where some communities are uncomfortable participating, then that is already a disadvantage to your study. So, for example, I know a lot of folks in Madison do a lot of research at UW Health Hospital, but is that the best place for our communities that are underserved, underreached to come? And are they comfortable coming? Is that the space that is best for all communities to access? And we have to think about that. That's just one example. There's also community issues. There's community turf issues. If you want to have a community-based program, you need to make sure that that community feels comfortable accessing. I can talk about places in Milwaukee where we have to be on neutral territory because we know there's some boundaries. There's bridge boundaries, there's street boundaries, there's all kinds of boundaries here that we have to be mindful and intentional about when we're placing research studies in our community. So those are just some examples. And consider other perspective in terms of, and I know the broad consent is something we talk about where we consent folks for one study, but we have a statement of broader context about use of their information in other studies. We need to be clear about that with communities and thinking about how does that impact the willingness to participate. And so, Sue, you want to talk more about that? Are you good? I kind of hear your wheels turning. We're good? All right.
No, we're
I
good,
know I
yeah.
hear our wheels. And so thinking about, I just wanted to also leave this too with you, rejecting assumptions. We all looked at that video, and typically we show that video and people have already had some assumptions. And we are asking you to put some of those assumptions aside, or put those assumptions aside, and allow for the process to be organic and experience it with the person in the moment. Because what happens is that you get this new set of data, new information, new ideas, and new ways to engage with these communities that otherwise might be left behind. And diversity and train the team is really important. Diversifying your team. You heard, you saw, many people would like to have researchers and team members who look like themselves. That doesn't mean they won't participate, but it does mean it may enhance how they participate, right? We want to make sure we're giving folks the best possible experience of research participation possible. And that does include diversity of team members. It's really critical that we think about that. And then being very conscientious of those interpersonal dynamics. And I will say this, just because a person is the same race as a person doesn't mean that that interpersonal skill is there. You really need to make sure that the people that we're hiring have the skill set, have the belief, are willing to be trained and to think differently about how to approach these research studies, in particular in just community, but also even in our clinical trials. When we're thinking about recruiting folks from hospitals, there's a certain type of interpersonal dynamic, especially when you're recruiting people in emergency situations. You've got to have a level of sensitivity, a level of understanding, but you also have to know that audience before you get to making that ask. It's the same concept no matter where you're doing the research. And again, it is not a cookie cutter approach. I will also say we will make mistakes, but the goal is to make sure that if we make those mistakes, to be kind to ourselves and be apologetic to the community. Next slide, Sue. All right. I think we're at the point where we're asking questions. I saw a ton of things going across the chat. I think Sue was monitoring those. I could not monitor them, but I do want to thank you for your time. I just want to say, as I turn it back to Sue too, one of the things about Just Research that I think Sue and I are building together as we're co-leading this Just Research study program or training program, we really want to be a conduit that doesn't just talk about this work, but actually gives investigators practical applications that they can utilize in their day-to-day work. Whether you're the principal investigator, you're the team member, you are a community member working with research, it does not matter. We want to make sure that all folks who do this, we are going the next level to say, this is how you can try, this is safe, and giving you tools in your toolkits that you can actually utilize immediately after you participate in the work or in the workshops. Sue, I'll turn it over to you. Thank you guys so much.
No, I think we should turn it over to questions. I'm gonna stop sharing.
All right.
So we can
Awesome. Thank you both
see
very
everybody.
much. There are some questions in the chat. I'm going to start with Kelly asking, have there been any UW Research Bootcamp 101 type platforms that community members have been invited to in order to learn about the research process, IRB, participation, funding, etc.?
I think, Sue, you can talk about this too, but Kelly, as I think I tried to answer in the chat, we actually have community members that come to our training. And we do, while we don't necessarily have a boot camp, we actually do have the space for community and researchers and research teams to actually engage and have a authentic conversations. And we do answer some of those questions around IRB. We have not necessarily done an IRB specific boot camp or training, but it is incorporated in the work that we do. I'm not sure if there's others on campus who are doing that, but that's kind of what we've done. We've been intentional about making sure community members, CAB members, pastoral members, just lay community members are participating in the community, in the training with our teams, because that is really critical and has just been so enriching, and has created this wonderful dynamic that we hope to continue.
Yeah, I think the IRB has a community facing city training at this point too. So there's that. And then I was just also thinking on this topic, I don't know, people know Dr. Carla Esterau, who's in, she's with the Wiseman Center, but also in kinesiology, has training preparing folks with intellectual and cognitive disabilities, participation in research. So it's not one giant program, but there's full pockets of folks working on these issues, I think, right now.
Great. Some of these are comments, which is a very rich discussion, but I'll let people read those. This one, though, asks, it would be helpful to have resources persons help investigators personally take this first step to community engagement, jumping into an unfamiliar community culture. That's a skill set that was likely not part of their training.
That's the subject of our application with under review at PCORI right now. And we've put an application in to build a really hands-on kind of supported approach to provide for researchers who are wanting to take that step, but it's a big step. And talking about that step, as much as we talk about that step, it's much more beneficial to be able to be guided through the action of taking that step. So yeah, so stay tuned on that, I hope.
Great, thank you. Another one is NIH, other funders, agencies, timelines need to be expanded in order to make the community part of the process. An FOA that has a 2-month timeline is not conducive to building new relationships. And I guess to that, what both of you raised is that you build a relationship to build a relationship and do research, but don't tie it to an RFA. And if an RFA comes, it comes, at which point you'll be ready. But the goal is not to respond to an RFA the first time that you're building this relationship.
Yeah, I think that's absolutely the point. If you're interested in this type of work with community, again, it is getting to know the facets of whether that's in the hospital community, whether that's in the, grassroots community, whatever that community word means for your research, you learn about that community in advance and identify key partners, potential key partners, key stakeholders, community members, and just learn of them. We recommend going to meetings. We recommend and just sitting in the back of the room, introducing yourself, but not asking for anything, just really learning from those folks. And it also gives you a new understanding of their perspectives. And it creates a space where you can just feel free to get knowledge, so that when you are writing for your grant, you don't have to go and hurry to ask. You already know what some of those challenges are, what some of your barriers are going to be, because you've been in the space already previously.
Great. Let's see if there's others. Kelly is also posted recommended resource of interested, just ask training for study teams. So thank you for that. Are you two seeing anything that you want to address? Most of these are comments, not questions. So I think. Any other questions from the group?
Well, I wondered, Nazmi, you might actually be better to answer this one. What steps does SNPH take working with UW Health and others to help overcome logistical challenges? to including patients from other locations?
Yeah, so this is one of those things where, just as Gina and Susan said, it needs to be an all of institution response. An individual investigator is going to find it very tricky to recreate all the resources that they need. So it's a top priority action for, say, the UW Clinical Trials Institute. And as part of that, in the hiring process, we've taken care to make sure that we have as much diversity and want more of it in the people that are approaching participants for research, as well as taking advantage of ICTR's connections and the centers on campus that already know the community, so that you go in with, not both feet sort of ham-handedly, but in a careful, considered way. So a lot of work, I think, to be done there, but steps are being taken to build that infrastructure. But I think, as people have pointed out, it needs to be acknowledged that this is a time-consuming, important process that can't really be rushed, so that building of the relationship has to be a top priority. But definitely a hot topic. And then Dina points out African American Health Network.
Yep.
Is a great resource. Awesome. Okay.
Yeah, great resource. We are connected with them as well. Absolutely great resources. There are some really great opportunities and resources in the thing across the state, actually, truthfully, whether you're looking at urban, rural, people living with developmental disabilities, whether you're specific to Alzheimer's clinical trials. I think the resources are out there. It's a matter of, like you're saying, Nasia, really doing some background homework, and it is time consuming, but I will guarantee you, if you're willing to put in the time on the front end, on the back end, you will definitely see the return on your investment.
Definitely well spent. I think study teams just have to build in that, the pieces that they need ahead of time. Yeah. It's very difficult to do it when which is what happens now, is that you're trying to recruit, you're not getting yeses, you wonder why, and time is slipping by. That
right.
Space to be and build that relationship.
And the pressure is on.
Yeah.
That's the problem.
And
one of the problems.
I would recommend to the group too, if you're new to this space, find some allies who are not new. Find some seasoned investigators who have done this work and done it well. And that will help you not only build your own confidence, but it will help you as far as people making referrals for you to go in community. Now, your obligation is to make the referral. You can get in there, but your obligation is to stay and to do the work. But if you're uncomfortable with that, I would suggest finding a confidant, a team member, another investigator who has modeled this already. That's really important.
Awesome. And on that note, we are at time. I want to thank our two speakers so much for their very wonderful presentations and comments, and really practical advice for how to help us move forward. Thank you both, and thank you to the participants. Bye-bye.
Thank you for having us.
Yeah, thank you. Bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.